You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host, author, and occasional misanthrope, Juliette Miranda. Go to theunwritablerant.com and you can subscribe on iTunes or connect with the show on Facebook and Twitter.
Well, hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda. Welcome to episode number 82 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Y'all, I have a bit of a confession to make. I've gotten a little bit of a head start on the bourbon. But don't worry, I am still more than ready for a toast. So you know the rules. Grab a glass, fill it up with something tasty, and let's raise them up. Cheers, y'all. All right. Today, I am drinking Clyde May's straight bourbon whiskey. This is the second product that I have had from the Clyde May's family. The first was their Alabama-style whiskey, and that was something of an acquired taste because they use dried apples in the barrel. This, however, their straight bourbon whiskey is very traditional and very delicious. In fact, I would say that this is perfect for those of you who are looking for something of a budget-friendly bourbon. It's less than $30 a bottle, and way better tasting than anything from Maker's Mark or Jim Beam. It's just an incredibly mild, easy-to-drink bourbon with great flavor. It smells warm and a little toasty, kind of like marshmallows. A little bit of vanilla in there, and then you taste it. And oh, y'all. It has that light sort of caramel flavor that I like, rounding out into a little bit of spice, a little bit of citrus, and kind of an earthy flavor at the end. So easy to drink. I would absolutely recommend just drinking this straight. It doesn't need ice. You could conceivably make a very good cocktail with it, but why? Just drink it. Now, y'all, you are going to be very amused to know that I have hit an all-time low. It's true. Just when I think I've got my act together and I know what I'm doing with my life, I do something so spectacularly stupid, so outer limits ridiculous that I surprise even myself. You probably heard that this past week we had something of a blizzard come across most of the country. Now here in Chicago we got, maybe about 5 or so inches. Definitely not enough to shut anything down, but just enough to sequester my guy and I in our house for 2 days. Neither one of us likes dealing with snow, so when it falls down a little bit heavier than we like, we will lock ourselves inside our house and reenact our own version of The Shining, without all the murder and everything. So for those 2 days, we drank a whole lot of bourbon, made some very fun meals, but for the most part, we were infinitely lazy, particularly me. And I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I was so lazy that I did not shower. Now, me being a girl, well, I smell like unicorns and rainbows, so it wasn't that big of a problem. But still, normally I'm a shower every day kind of gal, so by the middle of the second day, I was feeling a little funky. I decided to make my shower something of an event. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to do a deep conditioning treatment, exfoliation, have a whole lot of bubbles involved. It was going to be bliss. So I run on up to the bathroom, turn the shower on, and go about collecting all of my girly gear. Now, I had no reason at this particular point in time to assume there was anything different about my shower, and that there was no reason for me to just not get right in it. So I do, and I am immediately greeted by a blast of cold water. I don't mean room temperature water, and I don't mean lukewarm water that is on its way to getting hot. No. I mean icy, frigid, polar bear cold water smack in the face. It was so painful and so jarring that I screamed so loud my guy heard me all the way down in our so-called soundproof podcast studio. Well, he came on the run expecting to see a crime scene in the bathroom. Now, he was greeted by Psycho, but by Psycho I mean me, standing there naked, wet, and shivering. My guy, being my guy, looks at me and says, "Oh, hey, I'm kind of digging the naked and wet thing, but what's up with the shivering?" Which, of course, makes me now naked, wet, shivering, and pissed off. So I do what any reasonable person would do in a situation like that. I blamed my guy. I look at him and I go, "What did you do?" And I lay into him for a good 5 minutes. Because it seemed perfectly reasonable to assume that my guy, being the way he is, had somehow managed to manipulate the water in order to prank me. Once I came up for a little bit of air, my guy calmed me down a little bit and suggested that we go to our utility room to see what was up with the water heater. And what do you know, it turns out the pilot light was out. My guy looks relieved at this and says to me, "Oh good, this is an easy fix." But I'm feeling a little skeptical about that. I don't know a whole lot about mechanics or machinery, but I've seen Mythbusters. I know what a hot water heater can do when it is improperly lit. So no, I tell my guy, he will not be fixing the water heater. I will instead call one of our 24-hour maintenance workers who happen to live in our townhome community and are available to take care of things like this. Because I am more than willing to sacrifice one of them to the towering inferno I'm sure our hot water heater will become, more so than I am my guy, whom I kind of want to keep around for a while. But my guy looks at me as if I am out of my mind. He thinks I'm being silly and ridiculous, and needfully wasteful because, of course, calling the maintenance team will incur a fee on us, which he doesn't want to have to pay. Me, I think that's trivial in comparison to the fact that he could be reduced to nothing more than a pool of mushy goo. So we dig in our heels and we engage in one of those things that only couples manage to pull off effectively, and that is a stare down. We're eyeballing each other, both of us convinced that the other is 1,000% wrong. And we stay that way for a good 3 or 4 minutes, making absolutely no progress whatsoever, until, unfortunately for me, my guy manages to distract me. See, he knows that I have the attention span of a weasel. So all he had to do was say, "Hey, did you happen to see the new Tiffany catalog? It's on the counter." And all of a sudden, I'm running off going, "Ooh, shiny objects." And that gives him the perfect opportunity to grab his toolbox and the kitchen lighter. Well, I return to our little utility room, and what I see does not instill a whole lot of confidence in me. For starters, the room smells like gas. And I can't say that surprises me, seeing the way my guy is down there on the ground poking at everything on that water heater. He's got more tools next to him than Bob Vila. Now me, I'm a fan of things like instructions and manuals and step-by-step guides, and I'm inclined to read these things prior to engaging in an activity that could conceivably make my house explode. My guy, however, is a man, and he operates on instinct. So he was down there with his hand shoved all the way in that water heater, pressing every single button and turning every single knob he could get his hands on. Now I know when my man sets his mind to do something, there is no changing it. So I decide to take preventative measures. I run off into the kitchen and I return with a fire extinguisher. Once again, my guy turns and looks at me as if I am absolutely out of my mind. And who knows, maybe I was. According to him, the only thing that fire extinguisher was going to be good for was putting out his smoldering ashes. Apparently, it was no match for an exploding water heater. But y'all, my heart was in the right place. It truly was. I genuinely didn't think it was going to put out an exploding water heater. I just thought it could help out in case my guy inadvertently waved the kitchen lighter underneath his sleeve or something like that. And just to prove how serious I was about this situation, I pulled the safety pin out of the fire extinguisher. And then I braced myself. My guy clicks on that kitchen lighter, inserts it somewhere into the depths of that water heater, and the next thing I know, there's a whoosh. Again, I feel the need to explain that I don't have mechanical knowledge. Up until this point, I was essentially convinced that our water heater was run by a team of tiny elves. So when I heard that whoosh, I didn't think, I didn't pause, I just reacted. Because I didn't know how much fire was good fire and how much would be bad fire. All I know is that I saw more fire than I anticipated. Now, I have experience with firearms. I used to go hunting with my dad all the time, and I was a fairly decent shot. But a fire extinguisher is kind of different than a rifle. It certainly isn't as precise. And that's probably why, when I pulled that trigger, I managed to coat the entire water heater, our utility room floor, and most of my guy in a thick, sticky coating of white chemical foam. Well, I took one look at that room and saw my guy covered in more chemicals than a Twinkie, and I did the one thing you are not supposed to do in situations like that. I broke down laughing. I couldn't help it, y'all. Well, all I can say is that I learned 3 things from that whole little ordeal. 1, the exact extent of my guy's sense of humor. 2, the cost of all of the parts that we needed to replace the ones I had destroyed. And 3, the number to our local poison control center, whom I am going to raise my glass up to right now. Because after they got through chuckling at my situation, they very kindly informed me that no, I had not done any permanent damage to my guy. And with that, I'm drinking some bourbon. Cheers, y'all. This bourbon is so smooth and so easy to drink, and I've been spiking my guy's coffee with it every morning with hopes that he will forget what I did to him. Deploying that fire extinguisher on my guy was definitely not my most brilliant moment, but at the very least, it was defendable. I can't say I gave it much thought. Everything I did was based more on impulse rather than rationale. I cannot say as much for my dating history, however, which was a very black period of my life where I consistently made bad decisions. Worse still, they were educated decisions. Now, we all have that one person in our past who is just beyond comprehension, who was so terrible and awful that we wonder what the hell we were thinking. And of course, I've got one of those guys. I've got many of those guys, actually, but one in particular. Let's call him Wally Wrong Turn. I truly can't say I should have known better, because I absolutely did know better than to date this guy from the moment I met him. In my defense, I was unemployed at the time, and my life was otherwise so uneventful that I willingly allowed this ass monster access to it just so I would have something to do. And if that isn't the worst reason to date someone, I don't know what would be. Not surprisingly, our relationship played out kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book that only ends in disaster. This was back when I was living in Los Angeles, and I had been spending way too much at a place called Palladino's. This was a dive bar just outside of Encino. It gave miserable hairbands a place to play beyond their parents' basements. And that particular night, Mike Tramp from White Lion was playing, solo, which was the first bad omen of my night. So I'm sitting at a table off to the side, and Wally Wrong Turn approaches me with a band flyer. This was the preferred form of marketing at the time, not websites, not email, passing out photocopied band flyers. He stops to chat with me for a bit and is unfortunately charming. I was such a sucker for his type back then, the industrious musician who was just enough of a dickhead to be intriguing, but not enough of an asshole to be unlikable. Very dangerous combination for many women, I'm sure. Now, unlike 98% of the guys in Palladino's that night, he was only a musician by night. By day, he sold Amway products. Which I found out when he tried to recruit me for his team in response to my asking him out on a date. Now, this was a very important moment. It's what I like to consider a relationship crossroad, where there are 2 ways you can go. So what do? My first option is to realize that he only agreed to go out with me so that he could try to further suck me into direct marketing hell. Or I could take his band flyer and Amway brochure and gleefully give him all of my contact information, then hover over the phone for 3 straight days willing him to call me. Well, y'all, I could list the 9,942 ways I attempted to rationalize my wrong decision, but the truth is, I just wanted somebody other than Visa to call me. And I'll tell you, when Wally Wrong Turn finally did call, he had one hell of a good game. He apologized profusely for taking so long to call, explained just how tremendously busy his Amway business was, and then offered to make it up to me by taking me out to dinner. This all would have been lovely, except for the fact that he showed up to our first date an hour late and then spent 30 minutes parked in front of my apartment complex talking on his phone. So tell me, what would you have done at this particular relationship crossroad? Would you have walked right out to his car, pounded on the window, and then flipped him off for being so rude? Or would you, hide behind your blinds to watch his car, reapply your lipstick 20 times, and then thank him for being tardy when he finally knocks on your front door? Oh yes, this was my sorry existence back in Los Angeles. I'll tell y'all, being involuntarily unemployed destroyed my self-esteem and massacred my common sense. This guy just seemed like the best I was going to get. I even tried to convince myself that I should appreciate the fact that he was taking me out on real dates and not trying to grope me on the back of a tour bus. Of course, this illusion was a little hard to maintain considering he would hit me up with a recruiting pitch halfway through every date we went on. And I couldn't even be flattered by that because he gave the same damn sales pitch to every single person he met. Clearly, he was just keeping me around as arm candy so that he could look all the more successful. And my God, did he ever take advantage of that. He used me to get into parties and shows all over town where he would immediately forget my existence to take advantage of all the jobless musicians that he encountered. He'd woo them with tales of the fortunes they could earn on his team while still playing in their bands, and they would fawn all over this guy as if he were holding a record contract. I had to hand it to him. Wally Wrong Turn had the sales pitch worthy of the devil himself. The problem was that this guy never knew when to quit. He once spent so much time working the room at a party and had gotten so caught up in hawking his stupid pyramid scheme that I fell asleep on the couch. The host of the party woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning to tell me in no uncertain terms that if I did not remove my boyfriend from his kitchen, where, by the way, he had set up a mini Amway shop complete with product demonstrations and charts, he'd be calling the cops. At this particular juncture in our relationship, I could have taken two directions. I could have told the host that I had never met that guy in my life, called a cab, and quietly snuck out the back door. Or I could have helped him pack up all his swag, which I didn't even know he had brought, and silently accept him bitching all the way home about how I had ruined his sale. I think everyone has their breaking points when it comes to relationships. There's always that one event that just kind of tips the scales enough to make you come to your senses. My breaking point came 2 weeks later. Wally had invited me to join him for a dinner with all of his new recruits. He told me this was his way of thanking them for joining his team and getting them excited about working for him in his pyramid nightmare. What it really turned out to be was a group of 6 sorry, out-of-work musicians who were spending time with Wally for the exact same reasons I was. They just had the advantage of not having to sleep with him. Wally, that dick, spent the entire meal preening and boasting about all the money he was making and would continue to make with their help. Of course, the musicians were all too busy stuffing their faces with the first meal they'd had in months that hadn't come out of a can to care. Me, I wept very silent, internal tears. During dessert, Wally disappeared under the guise of taking a phone call. It was all too conveniently timed out for comfort. And big shocker, when the bill arrived, no Wally. Now his recruits were all tossing back shots and eating cake with reckless abandon. So what did they care? Wally had promised to pay the tab. That left me. So I do a quick sweep of the restaurant. Bathroom to parking lot, Wally was nowhere to be found. And you know what that means, y'all. Crossroad time. So what do you think? Did I duck out the back door and let the musicians foot the bill and never call Wally again? Or did I use my credit card, the one reserved for emergencies like rent, and pay the bill, and then never call Wally again? I'm only partly ashamed to admit that I did in fact take crossroad number 2. I may not have cared for Wally at that point, and I may have been truly disgusted with the situation, but I felt a little bad for the musicians that he had suckered onto his team. They had already coughed up all of their pocket change to pay for business starter kits, and they would undoubtedly learn soon enough what kind of person Wally was. So I paid that tab. I maxed out my credit card, and I did it because I felt I had to. Here's the thing, though. Guys like Wally never really go away on the first try. After plaguing me with voicemail messages apologizing profusely because apparently there was some sort of sales emergency that required his attention, he eventually turned up on my doorstep a few days later. I was at home then, recuperating from minor foot surgery, which he knew because I had asked him a while back if he would give me a ride home from the hospital, and he declined, explaining that he would be too busy converting his garage into his Amway office to help. But there he was on my doorstep, looking contrite and holding a card and flowers. I was too gorkled on painkillers to really care or maintain any sort of conversation, so he ultimately got defeated and left. But he left his offerings on my kitchen table and suggested that I give him a call when I was feeling better. He leaves, and I open his card, and as I do, $300 bills drop into my lap. Just enough money to cover the bill he'd stuck me with at the restaurant. I don't know exactly what he hoped to earn by giving me that cash. Forgiveness, maybe reconciliation. Me, I looked at it as restitution. Relationship restitution. And it was just what I needed to finally take a detour from Wally Wrong Turn. And a new crossroad presented itself to me, and I finally made what I considered the perfect decision. And I am sure that all the strippers I blew that money on couldn't have agreed with me more. And with that, I'm going to have some more of my bourbon. Hang on, y'all. All right. I'm going to go pour myself some more of my bourbon. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to everybody who is listening to my podcast. I love having y'all along for my crazy adventures, and I love sharing bourbon with you. So if you've got something good that you want me to try, a great new bourbon or whiskey that you think I'd like, hit me up on Twitter and tell me all about it. I will do my best to drink it on the show. And if you're interested in finding some other podcasts to listen to, I would recommend checking out the Podern Family on Twitter. It's a collection of tons of podcasts, everything you could possibly want. From movie reviews to comic books to political banter, all of it is right there. Podern Family. So that's enough out of me, folks. I'll be back to chat with you again next week. In the meantime, cheers.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. You can hear new episodes of The Unwritable Rant on radiovegas.rocks every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern and on IPMNation.com on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and hear best of episodes every weekday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton relay. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.